Hello everyone! In this video we continue our bike pass series where we're covering all 8 bike paths in Korea for a total of 1,800 kilometers of official bike trails. In part 1, we covered all 5 bike paths shorter than 200 kilometers on Korea's west coast. And in this video we'll cover the Jeju Fantasy Bike Path, the beautiful 234 kilometer bike path that follows the coast around Jeju Island. We'll also show you how to get there, including a good tip if you're flying from Seoul, and then give our recommended itinerary for different types of cyclists, including those looking to camp for the whole ride, which includes Kakao Map links to the bike path, as well as for each day of cycling, and the location of the airport and ferry terminal, which are the start and finish of the ride. So hopefully it helps a bit just to follow along the document as you cycle in Korea. If you want GPX files from the Kakao Map links, you can download a Google Chrome extension from the description of this video that changes the Kakao Map directions by first opening the map link in the itinerary while using Google Chrome on your computer, then clicking the extension icon in the top right where the extensions are, and the download will automatically start. Also, before we start, I forgot to mention this in part 1, but Korea has a bike passport system, and all 8 bike paths here have stamp booths located every 10 to 50 kilometers or so. And when you collect all the stamps in the passport, you can get the Grand Slam medal at the end of the journey. And stay tuned to the end of this series where we'll go over in detail how to get the bike passport or how to use the app instead. In the last video, we left off with this ranking of all the bike paths we've covered so far. So now we just have spots 2 to 4 left, which are all amazing and must rides if you get the chance to, in my opinion. So let's see where Jeju Fantasy Bike Path ranks amongst the rest, which is located all the way south of the Korean peninsula, on the tropical island of Jeju, for a total of 234 kilometers, a full loop around the island. Jeju itself is an incredibly beautiful island, and commonly called the Hawaii of Korea. So naturally, the Jeju Fantasy Bike Path is without a doubt one of the most scenic bike paths in Korea, and it's the perfect length at 234 kilometers, to make it not too short and also not too long to get overly fatigued. In fact, I think even those who don't cycle that much could get around the island in a week and still do a lot of sightseeing, as it's fairly flat for most of the ride, and since it follows the coastline, there are no major hill climbs to worry about, but it can also have stronger winds because of this. Also, Jeju has an abundance of convenience stores, restaurants, and places to stay, so you don't need to prepare any food in advance, and just having a bottle of water on you is enough. It's also the easiest bike path to camp for free at, so you won't have to do any stealth camping here, and you can easily pitch your tent at one of these beaches that allows free camping without a worry. I link these in the description in the itinerary too. The best times to cycle in Jeju would be the spring and the fall, especially between the months of April and June, or September and November, to avoid the hot summer months and cold winter months. If you want to camp or be able to swim in the ocean, cycling in June or September would be the best times. Now let's go over a little overview of the path. So you'll be starting the path in Jeju City, which is the biggest city on Jeju Island located in the north, and since it's a loop, you can pick either direction. But we recommend going counterclockwise so you're always right next to the coast on the right side, and so you can end the trip in one of the nicest parts of Jeju. When you get off the airplane or ferry and start heading west, you'll be riding through the city with some nice lookouts over the ocean, and there'll be a little mix of the bumpier sidewalks, and you'll be riding a bit on the roads with the cars. And just so you know, there's always a lot of rental cars and travelers all along the path unless you're cycling in the colder months, so be prepared to take things slow here and there, and just enjoy the scenery. Once you exit Jeju City, you pass by Iho Tewoo Beach just about 7 kilometers into the ride, which has these interesting horse lighthouses right next to it, as horses are native to Jeju. And it's also the closest free campground to the airport, so it's a good spot to spend the night at if you don't plan on cycling a full day yet. And even after Iho Tewoo Beach, you're still mostly in civilization, and it feels like a city still, with a lot of restaurants, hotels, and convenience stores. But then just about 13 kilometers into the ride, it starts to get a bit more scenic, where it gets higher up on the ocean, and you get a bit more open sky and less buildings. Also, things quiet down a bit, and from this point until you arrive back in Jeju City, you're in for a nicer ride that doesn't feel so much like riding downtown, and more like riding through fishing villages with a big hint of tourism, as Jeju is a very touristy island. And after about 36 kilometers into your ride, you arrive at Hyeopjae Beach and Geumneung Beach, which are right beside each other, and one of our favorite areas in Jeju, and also one of the best places to camp on the island, as there's a free campground right next to Geumneung Beach. And the beaches just have a really nice vibe, with crystal clear waters that are plenty warm to swim in from late May to early October, and rows of palm trees which make you feel kind of like you're in Hawaii a bit. If you're taking the camping approach, spend a couple of nights here and make a fire at nighttime next to your tent. It's really fun, and personally I think you'll regret it if you don't stop here, as it has one of the most beautiful sunsets I've ever seen. Then when you're ready to leave, you're entering the west coast, which is the area with the least amount of civilization on the whole island, and also the point where the bike path mostly separates away from the car traffic until you're back close to Jeju City again. Here you're cycling past open grass fields and a ton of windmills that are lined up in the water as well. You'll also notice more of a fishing village life here, as the path goes in and out of the villages, into the farmland, and it's mostly flat until you reach the 60-kilometer point in the loop and arrive at Daejonguk, a fishing town home to Mosu Port, which also has some beautiful sunsets, and Hyeopjae Beach, which you can camp for free a bit to its east. And after Daejonguk, you're back inland, and you can even check out some older Japanese military structures such as this underground bunker and older control towers too, which are really cool to explore. You then arrive at Songgaksan, which is about an hour hike to see the volcanic crater, and a nice view of Sambangsan in the distance. And now you're cycling the south coast, which is one of the nicest sections of the island. There are a lot of beaches such as the Hwasun Golden Sand Beach, which you can also camp at for free, and big tourist areas like the Jungmun Tourist Complex with the fancy hotels. This is technically the hilliest section, but it's not bad at all. And after about 40 kilometers, you'll arrive in Seogwipo City, the second biggest city on the island. Seogwipo is a really nice city with a tropical vibe to it, and has some nice parks nearby, such as the Chunjeon Waterfalls. I strongly recommend spending at least a night here, or even two, as you're now halfway around the loop, and there won't be any more cities with this amount of amenities until you're back in Jeju City again. After leaving Seogwipo, there's a strip of about 40 kilometers without much civilization, and a bit less tourism overall, but it's still there, especially at Saesogak, where there's a gorge that allows for kayaking and see-through kayaks. And then you pass some more fishing villages, and spend some more time riding along the coast, and to be honest the scenery is quite similar for a lot of the south coast, but not in a bad way at all. And by the time you reach the southeast, you'll end up at Hyeopjae Beach, another great spot for free camping with a really shallow beach where the tide goes out for hundreds of meters. And from this point until Jeju City, you're back in one of the hot spots in Jeju, first passing Seongsan Ilchubong, which is a really cool volcanic crater formation on the ocean that you can hike up and apparently catch a nice sunrise too, which we weren't so lucky the one time we tried. And here there is a port that allows you to take the optional trip to Udo Island, a smaller island with a 12-kilometer loop that I'd strongly recommend if you can do it in the morning, but it fills up a lot with tourists riding these little carts by about 8 or 9 a.m. And then when you continue northwest, you end up on a 60-kilometer stretch of some of Jeju's nicest beaches, and it makes for a great finish as well. You can see we got a bit unlucky with torrential downpour, which can happen especially in the summer months, but in this section, you pass Geumneung Beach, which is Jeju's most underrated beach in my opinion. And by that I mean it's the nicest with the least amount of tourists. And it's also right next to Geumneungni, a local village with some hidden gems to try out. Then you continue to Hamdok Beach, a very touristy beach that's almost the end of the ride. So it's a good spot to spend a couple nights at the end of the ride as there are so many restaurants and hotels to stay at, and the beach itself is pretty nice. And then from Hamdok to Jeju City, you're going back into full civilization, just like the start of your journey, spending more time inland next to the main roads. And that's that, the end of the 234-kilometer loop around Jeju. Honestly, as far as cycling goes, it's not the best bike path in Korea or anything, as it lacks a bit in diversity. Some sections are bumpy, some are narrow if you have pannier bags, and a lot of it is right next to cars, which often park right in the bike lane, making you have to swerve into traffic to avoid them. But Jeju is Jeju, and it's called the Fantasy Bike Path for a reason, as it's really scenic for most of the ride, with plenty of beautiful nature and beaches to make the ride enjoyable for anyone. And that's why it's ranked number 4 on our list, which might seem low to some people, but I wouldn't be surprised if others ranked at number 1, as all of the top 4 are absolutely amazing and are totally interchangeable in my opinion. So now let's look at how to get there. Since Jeju is an island, the main 2 forms of transportation are by airplane or by ferry, and most people will be taking an airplane, so let's start with that. If you're leaving domestically, you can fly from the following cities, and the flight will be an hour or less. And if you want to fly internationally, you can also fly from the following places in Asia: There are various ways to take bikes onto an airplane, such as packing it up in a bike box or putting it in a bike carry bag. And if you're flying from Gimpo Airport near Seoul, the airline Jeju Air will lend you a bike carry bag for 30,000 won from Monday to Thursday and 10,000 won from Friday to Sunday. When you arrive in Jeju, apparently there is also a bike assembly station to reassemble your bike when you get there, and one in Gimpo as well. So you have to look for the signs or ask the information desk. If you want to rent a bike in Jeju, there are a lot of rental places right outside the airport that I haven't personally used, but if you just type in bike rental on Google Maps near Jeju Airport, you'll be able to find a place no problem. And a lot of them even rent out pannier bags and racks as well. If you decide to take a ferry, here is a list of cities that have ferries going there. You can reserve the ferries from the website Direct Ferries in English. And if you want to try using the Korean sites, which allow you to choose from more cities and get a better price, I linked a guide in the description to help people who can't read or understand Korean. And this site will even book your ferry for you for a cost if you need. We took the ferry from Wando to Jeju in 2021 for about 30,000 won each, and it took about 2.5 hours to get there. And we had to show up 3 hours early to get our bikes on before the cars. So I'd recommend doing the same, or even arriving a bit earlier. Let's talk about our recommended itinerary now. I'll break the trip up into 3 different kinds of cyclists. Experts who want to do more than 100 kilometers a day, sightseers looking to really explore the island and stop along the way at about 20 to 70 kilometers a day, and then for those looking to camp and sightsee along the island. As far as experts go, Jeju is the perfect length for a 2-day challenge. I recommend taking an early flight to Jeju City and spending the first day cycling across half the island for about 100 kilometers. Here you will pass Hyeopjae and Geumneung Beach, cycle along the less inhabited west coast, and then end up on the south coast in the touristy area of Seogwipo. On day 2, you'll be cycling the east coast for a total of 120 kilometers, starting the first half on the south coast going through the fishing villages, and the second half on the east passing Seongsan Ichubong and the nice beaches in the northeast. However, to be honest, if it's your first time going to Jeju, I wouldn't recommend spending your whole trip on your bike like that. I broke up the Sightseer itinerary into much shorter days, for a total of 5 days of cycling, and broke it up intentionally so you're stopping at some of the nicest spots on Jeju. On day 1, you'll bike less than 40 kilometers from Jeju Airport or the ferry terminal to Hyeopjae and Geumneung Beach, where you can spend a night or two relaxing, having some great food, and enjoying the nice sunset. Then on day 2, you'll make the biggest push along the west coast for about 66 kilometers, as you can get some good momentum here. You'll cycle past the fishing city of Daejongeup, go through the hillier section near the Chungmun Tourist Complex, and end the long day in Seogwipo City, with tons of hotels and restaurants to relax at the end of your ride. Day 3 will have you biking just under 60 kilometers along the south coast past Hwasun Beach to the famous Seongsan Ichubong and stay there, where you'll have the opportunities to hike and catch the sunrise the next day, or you can take the ferry to Udo and bike the 12-kilometer loop in the morning if you want. And then continuing northwest from Seongsan Ichubong on day 4, you'll be cycling a shorter day of 38 kilometers along the northeastern coast, passing Geumneung Beach and ending up at Hamdok Beach. And this is where you can choose to spend your celebration night, as the next day will be easy, and Hamdok is a more interesting spot than Jeju City to do it in my opinion. And then on day 5, you just cycle another 24 kilometers into Jeju City to finish the ride with an easy day. And for the final itinerary, since Jeju has enough official free campgrounds, I'm gonna add an itinerary for those who are looking to camp for the entire trip for a total of 6 days of cycling, and however long you want to relax in Jeju when you're not cycling, which I strongly recommend doing, as it can be very nice spending some nights at its beautiful beaches, and there's nothing quite like long-distance cycling and camping together. Day 1 will be the same as the previous itinerary, taking you to Hyeopjae and Geumneung Beach, but you'll camp near Geumneung Beach instead of a hotel. I strongly recommend spending more than one night here, as this is one of my favorite spots to camp just because it's so close to facilities such as bathrooms and convenience stores. It's incredibly fun to swim in the clear waters, and it just feels like a nice tropical island vacation. Once you reluctantly decide to leave Geumneung Beach, you can spend day 2 cycling 41 kilometers along the less inhabited west coast and continue past Daejongeup, Songgaksan, and arrive at Hwasun Golden Sand Beach. This is a really nice spot to camp on either the decks or the beach, and sometimes you have to pay to use the decks I think, but the beach is always free as far as I know. There are bathrooms really close to where you camp, And day 3 will be your longest day cycling, 64 kilometers along the entire south coast, past Seogwipo City where you can stop for lunch, and you'll end up at Hyeopjae Beach, the big beach that changes completely depending on if it's high tide or low tide. And it has a free campground in this grass area right beside the beach, with bathrooms just across the road and another set towards the beach as well. And then on day 4, you'll cycle about 34 kilometers to Seongsan Port, take a ferry to Udo, which leaves every 30 minutes from 8 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., and then you'll cycle a little ways to Udo Sano Beach. There will be a lot of people until the last ferry, and then you get most of the island to yourselves during the evening, which is really nice. And you can choose to cycle around the island during the evening or the next morning when you get most of the road to yourself. And then on day 5, you'll head back to the main island and have a shorter day cycling 29 kilometers to Geumneung Beach, which became one of our favorite places to camp on the entire island because it was pretty peaceful when we spent a week back there in June 2022. And you have direct access to the convenience store and the bathrooms nearby, and it also has an amazing sunset. Alternatively, you could bike ahead and spend this day at Hamdok Beach instead if you're looking for more of a touristy atmosphere with more restaurants, which also has free camping that we've never tried before. On day 6, you'll be biking the last 35 kilometers to Jeju City. And that does it for our guide to the Jeju Fantasy Bike Path. And not everything could make it into this video, so feel free to ask any questions you have about Jeju's bike path, and more general questions about biking in Korea will be answered in detail in our final video in the series on April 7th. Thanks so much for watching, stay safe out there, and enjoy cycling on Jeju. And stay tuned for next week's video on the amazing East Coast Bike Path.